We continue our talk about the four temperaments and knowing who we are. These temperaments are important to understand who we are, but also working on the virtues and vices that hinder us from growing in holiness. Christian perfection requires us to work on these temperaments so we can become a better father, mother, husband, wife, manager, and employee. Hello everyone, today's episode is about how to truly know ourselves by using St. Thomas's temperaments as described by Father Marin. We continue our discussion with the Melancholic and Choleric temperament.
Welcome to another episode of Practical Catholic with David Cease. Practical Catholic is a spiritual coaching show to help you find peace, love, and joy in family and work life. We are here each and every week to help you grow spiritually, to become successful in this life, and to be a saint for the life after.
My story begins at Marine Combat Training in Camp Lejeune, South Carolina. It's basically advanced infantry training. After you go through 13 weeks of boot camp, you essentially go to 4 weeks of more advanced infantry school training. And so I'm there, and one of the things that was neat about it is that they would pick and choose who the leaders would be, who would be the guide, which was a very prestigious position, who would be the squad leader. So one day, we were doing machine gun drills, right, with the M60. So basically what it was that we had to get in pairs of three because a person who would man the machine guns would be three Marines. And so we had to break down into teams of three and then have all a machine gun there. It was basically a tripod with an extra barrel and then your M60. And we would have to take the M60 off the tripod and run about 20 yards and then put down the tripod, put the M60 on it, and then be ready to fire. And we had to keep doing this over and over again. And it was there to keep, putting in our mind how fast we could assemble and disassemble the M60 so we're ready to fire. So our whole platoon is kind of there in the field, and the sergeant, who's the instructor who's in charge of us, he gives us the instruction what we're supposed to be doing. And I'm there, and we had just hiked about 10 miles to get to this field. We're all exhausted and tired, and you can just see how the platoon is not moving. They're just kind of moping around, and the sergeant's just getting angrier and angrier. And at this point, I know he's going to start giving us consequences. So I don't know. Because I'm a sanguine type of a personality type, I just start exploding. And I get really angry. And I start ordering these Marines around. Now, we're all the same rank. And so I get them all in line. I explain everything. And voila, we're ready to train. Well, lo and behold, my sergeant recognizes that I have this ability to lead, so he makes me the guide, in essence, in charge of this whole platoon. So I'm like, oh, great. So I'm in charge of this platoon. And, sometimes you get this idea that you're better than everyone else because I'm this, platoon guide and in charge of this platoon. And, and I'm smarter than a lot of these people. So I had befriended a person in my platoon. He was about 6'7", big husky guy from the Midwest. He could probably do a lot of things. And so he had dyslexia, believe it or not, and so a lot of times we would be together. And it was funny because I'm 5'5" and he's about 6 foot. He was about 6'7", and so every time when we dug a fighting hole, I told him, I said, I can't make this fighting hole, this foxhole, taller than I am because I can't shoot. So we would always make it my height, right? So here's the 6'7". He would have to crouch down in the fighting hole to basically, in this small little hole because I'm 5'5" and he has at least a foot, higher than I am. So, he was really, really a nice guy. I really enjoyed him. And he get picked on every once in a while because he was considered, the rock in the platoon. And And so he would get picked on, and I would kind of defend him and say, hey, guys, he's really good, and, and everything else. So one day, we had to carry the 50 cal machine gun. And if you know anything about the 50 cal machine gun, it is one heavy machine gun. I'm talking extremely, extremely heavy. So we took it apart. So the barrel, you take the barrel off, and then you have the whole, assembly part and the barrel, and then you got the tripod. And so I had to carry the barrel. Now the barrel is extremely, extremely heavy on a 50 cal because it has to be thick. Okay, it's a 50 caliber round that's going down. And I remember we had to hike about a mile, and I picked it up. I'm literally straining to pick this thing up. And so I go to my buddy, and I said, hey, man, can you take this from me? I couldn't even walk 2 feet with this thing. He must have grabbed it with his single hand and picks it up, throws it on his shoulders, and he walks as if it was like a toothpick. And I was like, wow, that is great. What I learned in that experience is that we all have different personality types. Because my friend, his personality type was kind of like a melancholic temperament. He was very slow. Maybe not even melancholic. Maybe he was more like a choleric, more a phlegmatic kind of a temperament. He was very relaxed and kind of peaceful kind of a person. And that's why a lot of people could pick on him, because he never got aroused, that much. So he was more of a phlegmatic type of a personality. And yet, when the rubber met the road, I really needed him because he had other types of talents. He was 6'7", muscular, strong, and he could pick up that barrel of the 50 cal like there was no tomorrow. He could carry an M60. I could tell you he could probably shoot down rounds without even, worrying about the kickback, right? Me, I'm 5'5". I weighed probably about 140 pounds at that time. And, the kickback on the M60, I would feel it. But he was a husky guy. So a lot of times, when we look at these personality types that we have, we can't look at that as limitations. We can't look at one personality type as better than the other, because there are other talents, there are other capabilities outside of our personality types that makes us good or bad. And so, it was a great lesson. And that's when I really learned that in today's society, we really overblow personality types. Now, I know we're talking about that, and I know we're talking about personality types, but the emphasis here is that it's a baseline. It's a baseline for us to understand who we are so that we can become better, okay? And not to forget that we also have talents in other areas, or physically, that God created us as a human being. For example, I'm 5'5". I was smaller, okay? I could do things. I was more agile than my friend who was 6'7", but he was more muscular, all right? He was like a giant compared to me. I mean, certainly if I had to go toe-to-toe with him in boxing or pugil stick fighting, he would have killed me. But so I don't want you to think that everything is all about personality types. But it is important to understand them, because it does help us move forward and growing in virtue and growing in holiness. So let us continue now with our discussion about the 4 temperaments. Now, there are other sub-temperaments that St. Thomas talks about, but really the 4 that we're going to focus on are the 4 main ones that we can go over. The last week we talked about the sanguine, and I fall underneath that type of personality type. And so we are going to continue, and the next one we're going to talk about is the melancholic temperament, okay? The melancholic. I call this the Eeyore type of temperament. My wife, it kind of falls under this temperament, and it's funny because you can see it, and just like you could probably see me being sanguine as well. So let's continue. So The melancholic temperament. The melancholic temperament reacts weakly to stimulus, and it's difficult to arouse. However, after repeated repression, the reaction is strong and lasting, so that the melancholic temperament does not forget easily. Okay? So they don't forget that easily, all right? Unlike the sanguine, we do. We react quickly, okay? We have quick reactions, but they don't last that long. All right, whether they're emotional reactions or whether they're, things. So they forgive very easily. But this temperament, they don't forget very easily, but it takes a long time to get them moving, okay? As regards to good qualities, let's talk about the good qualities, which serve as predispositions to virtue. Persons of melancholic temperament are inclined to reflection, solitude, piety, and the interior life. So they're very into reflection. They like solitude, okay? And so these are great virtues to have. They are compassionate toward those who suffer, attracted to the corporal works of mercy, and able to endure suffering to the point of heroism and the performance of their duties. They have a sharp and profound intellect, and because of their natural bent to solitude and reflection, they generally consider matters thoroughly in silence and tranquility. That describes my wife perfectly, okay? She is very heroic, all right? It's funny because, no, it's not funny, but she runs a lot of programs in our homeschooling community. In fact, she probably runs 80% of the things that go on with our homeschooling community. And when you run programs in the homeschooling community, when you run a business as well, everyone thinks that they're right, and everyone thinks that their ideas are the better ideas. And so there's a lot of conflict when that happens, and it's difficult because unlike a business like I run, right, I can ultimately say, I'm the boss and you listen to me. And there's a certain chain of command that, inherently is in when you run a business. But when you run a program in the homeschooling community, there is no chain of command per se. And ultimately, there is no boss. I mean, you can say you either like it or not. But then you have the dynamism that they're supposedly all Christians and they're all supposedly your friends. But when there's conflict that occurs amongst this, all right, it can hurt. It hurts because they're supposedly good Christians and supposedly your friends. But when the conflict occurs, it is a lot of suffering. And so she does. She really endures the suffering to have these programs to the point of heroism. And, you can see that. And you think that this type of personality that you don't get, how can I say this? Like they don't suffer because they're always quiet. They don't express their suffering like a sanguine might. A sanguine would be like, oh my goodness, get off my back. These people kind of suffer in silence. And not only do they suffer in silence, but then they suffer and reflect about it, okay? And they're reflecting on that suffering. So a lot of times I learned to listen to my wife. And one good advice I learned is that sometimes they just want to hear themselves talk, and just, not be able to give that advice. So a lot of times she will express her sufferings towards me, and I will listen to it and gently, maybe one or two advice, but that's it. They are very, very sharp and profound intellect. My wife is extremely, extremely smart. She graduated with two and a half degrees, basically a minor and two majors, and very, very smart. They have such great depth, and they generally consider matters thoroughly in silence and tranquility. They do. They have deep thoughts and they think about it. Unlike the sanguine, who are reactionary. Shoot first and ask questions later. They will ask questions first and then shoot. Okay, so that is their good qualities. They may become detached and dry intellectuals or contemplative who are concerned solely with things of God. They usually appreciate the fine arts, but are more drawn to the sciences, especially the speculative sciences. And that is absolutely true, okay? So they are attracted to more of a contemplative life. But here's the difference here. They like the sciences. They like more of the analytical side as opposed to the arts. So that's what the melancholics likes. They are more into that speculative science of the art, okay, rather than the art itself. The beauty of the science of the art as opposed to the beauty of the emotional. What is this thing saying? How is it expressing? What is the expression of the emotion that the people are going into? They'll see a movie and they can criticize all the technicalities of the movie, as opposed to, wow, that was an entertaining movie. That was really great. What was the meaning behind that? And everything else. As regards their affective powers, when they love, it is with difficulty that they detach themselves from the object of their love. They suffer greatly if others treat them with coldness or ingratitude. Oh, that's important to understand, okay? In some ways, sanguine people, because, and I'm trying to compare the two, they're in some sense superficial in a sense that, they love, but it's like a passionate love, and then it just kind of goes. If you were to look at like tinder, they're like sanguine or like tinder, but melancholics are like a log. They'll burn and burn and burn and burn and burn and continue. That's why wood that's oak. It's great because it burns continuously and for long lasting. And so when they love, they deeply love. Okay. It's because they methodically choose it. It's not an emotional expression. Okay, so and they suffer a lot because when they're treated with coldness or ingratitude. The power of their will is greatly affected by their physical strength and health. If their physical powers are exhausted, their will is weak and practically null. But if they are in good health and spirits, they're energetic workers and joyful in spirit. So they're deeply affected by their physical health, their will, and their intellect. If they're physically not in good shape, they will, kind of go down, and their will go down with them as well. There are certain people that the will can be strengthened even when they're sick, either for one reason or another. But in this case, they are strongly affected by their physical strength and health. They have great sobriety and continence because they seldom experience the disorderly passions which may torment the persons of a sanguine temperament. We may say in general that this temperament is opposed to the sanguine temperament as the choleric temperament is opposed to the phlegmatic temperament. So opposites attract, right? I'm a sanguine personality temperament, and my wife is melancholic, okay? And I think God put us together to help each other, really, really help each other. So, but this is really it. They have good continence. They control their passions. Their passions don't get to them as the sanguine. The sanguine, their passions are there. So they're more of the act of the will as opposed to act of the passions. Okay, so they're very important. I learned that my wife is in some ways my better half. She is the sobriety and the countenance that a passionate sanguine person needs, especially when we see this opposite. So I learn a lot from her so that I can bring back my passions, hold back, and become more sober and more countenant, okay? Because she's a great example. She's not only a great example, but she's a great reminder. She, in essence, is my little, I call it Jiminy Cricket, right? My little conscience that helps me. But conversely, my sanguine attitude allows her to be alleviated and, brings in a certain level of joy into her life that I think sometimes if she were to not have someone like me, she would be kind of implode in a sense, right? Like sanguine people explode, but melancholic implode. They go inside themselves rather than pulling them outside. So we help each other out in doing that. But certainly we are definitely the two opposite poles, the sanguine and the melancholic. So among the saints who possess this particular temperament is St. John, the beloved disciple. You got St. Bernard, St. Aloysius Gonzaga, and of course, one of my favorite saints, St. Therese of Lisieux. Okay, so St. Therese, if you read the book, A Story of a Soul, you will see that she definitely is this melancholic type of personality. Deep reflections. I mean, she was basically meditating while going fishing with her father. You know, what type? Certainly a sanguine wouldn't be doing that. Great in-depth thinker and one of the most beloved saints of modern times. Here are some unfavorable traits of the melancholic. So what are they? An exaggerated tendency to sadness and melancholy. That's why they're called melancholic, right? They are exaggerated, you know, and that's why I show Eeyore. Oh, it's gonna rain. It's sunny. Why do you have this impression that's gonna rain? Oh, and they're always kind of this sadness. So everything is kind of leaning towards, I would call it the pessimistic side. You know, a lot of times when I am discussing things with my wife, it's like, why do you think that way? You know, and she's probably thinking the same way with me and saying, why do you think that way? Why do you think this optimistic side and not this? So we really do kind of need to meet in the middle because we are such an extreme on these temperaments. So they have this exaggerated tendency to sadness and melancholy. The second, an inclination to magnify difficulties and thus lose confidence in self. You're right. They look at just like sanguine is the opposite. They don't magnify. They look at it such like, oh, that's easy, right? They look at it and say, oh, that is so difficult, that is so hard, and they lose confidence in themselves. Okay, everything seems to be that difficulty because. Which feeds into that sadness and the melancholy. Third, excessive reserve and timidity with a propensity to scrupulosity. There is this overblown that everything is overly scrupulous. Everything has to be perfect. Everything has to be this excessive, perfection that goes out there. All right, and lack of resolution. Okay. It's resolution is the ability to change. Okay. And so sometimes it's very hard to change if you have a lack of resolution. They default to their own behaviors as opposed to really changing. Because the road to perfection, and that's what all Christians are called to, Christian perfection, is to change. And so melancholics are hard to change because they default back to their temperament. And that's part of it is this lack of resolution. Persons of melancholic temperament do not show their feelings as do the sanguine. Oh, that is definitely right on. They suffer in silence because they find it difficult to reveal themselves. They always seem to see the difficult and pessimistic side of things. Many enterprises are never begun because of their lack of confidence and resolution. So that is so important to understand is that persons of melancholic temperament do not show their feelings. Okay? They don't. They hide their feelings because they don't know how to express their feelings. Okay? Sanguine people know how to express their feelings because they just let it out, you know? But they don't know how to express their feelings. So a lot of times they can be trampled on, misunderstood, because they don't know how to express themselves. So, so what you want to be able to do, all right? The other thing is that they suffer in silence. They always seem to see the pessimistic side, all right? So if you don't build the virtue, okay, perseverance and of overcoming and of courage and fortitude, then they're never going to start any of the enterprises. They're never going to do that. Why? Because they're always pessimistic. That is too hard. Just look at Eeyore of Winnie the Pooh. You know, you can't see him, starting new endeavors or anything like that because he's like, oh, it's going to rain. Oh, this is going to be too difficult or too hard. So what kind of virtue that you need to work on. Fortitude, okay? Joy, all right? These are virtues that the melancholic needs to work on. It is important to inculcate in these persons a strong confidence in God and in themselves, as well as more optimistic view of life. Since they have good intellects and tend to reflection, they should be made to realize that there is no reason for them to be timid or irresolute. So what is the amazing part about melancholic is that they're smart. They can actually succeed. They can actually succeed better than a sanguine. And yet sanguines typically are the ones who are the leaders, and they make a lot of money. And you can see that out there, right? And they are so shallow and have low depth of knowledge that a lot of times they rely on the melancholic to get the job done. All right? They really do. Because they are the ones who can get things done. And they're smart. They have the extreme depth. But because they lack confidence, okay, and they're timid, they're never put into leadership positions, okay? But if they can overcome that, they will be a very, successful people. I think from a military standpoint, I look at two of the great generals of World War II. The first is Eisenhower, all right? Eisenhower was the commanding general of the European theater. And he was a different general than the second great general, which is General MacArthur. General MacArthur was certainly I would call him more on the sanguine side. He had a lot of confrontation, especially if you ever study the Korean conflict, where he had a lot of conflict, no pun intended here, between the president and him running the war in Korea. He was eventually fired. Truman actually would fire him, but he was very, emotional, and he wanted to take total control over the Korean conflict. So, but you have Eisenhower. Eisenhower was more of, I would say, melancholic, if not minimally. He was probably choleric. He was probably more of the melancholic or phlegmatic type of personality. So, but very smart, very, very, very smart. In fact, he actually is the one that brought the interstate highway system in the United States. He saw the highway systems in Europe during World War II, and he brought it to America. So you can thank Eisenhower for the interstate system, which allows us to travel hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles within hours. If you were to take the normal state highways, it would take you hours just to go 50 miles, okay? But the interstate highways, it takes us hours to do hundreds and hundreds of miles. So it's amazing. So they're very, very smart. They're very brilliant. They're resolute. They can get things done. And yet, it's their fear that sets in. It's the pessimism that sets in. So they have a lot they can learn from the sanguine, and conversely, the sanguine can learn a lot from the melancholic. At all costs, the director must destroy their indecision. Okay. This is now, if you have a spiritual director, okay, the spiritual director must destroy their indecision and cowardice and get them to make firm resolutions and to undertake projects with enthusiasm and optimism. Sometimes it is necessary to give them a special regimen of rest and nourishment and to forbid them to spend long hours in prayer and solitude or to observe fasts. So in a melancholic, you have to be very careful about your health. Okay, sanguine, like me, I don't have to worry about my health. I could do some crazy things. But for the melancholic, they do. And I noticed that with my wife. My wife, has to eat. She doesn't eat a lot. Like me, I can eat one meal a day. Fasting, no problem, because I can eat one meal a day. Now, that one meal is large, right? I can kind of go with, tired and sick. But a melancholic can't. They have to consistently eat, okay? And, they have to be able to be good, healthy, and shape. The second is they have to they have to project an enthusiasm and optimism that is there. I'm a firm believer that you learn by being with other people who are an opposite of your temperament. If you want to lose weight, who you want to hang around with? People who are, thin, right? And figure out what are they doing and get them excited. So it's the same thing. And I've been blessed with a wife that is melancholic, extreme melancholic, because I'm an extreme sanguine. So very, very blessed to have a woman like that, because I need someone like that to teach me, to help me and allow me to grow spiritually in my virtues. And I know in some ways my wife needs me the same way. But I never would think that I'm better than my wife, and my wife doesn't think that she's better than I am. Because we both understand and appreciate our qualities and our temperaments, and we learn from them. So I bring the enthusiasm and the optimism, and she brings the continence and the regularity and stick-it-to-ivism that gets the job done. So that's the melancholic, okay? So what's the next temperament that we have? Well, the next temperament that we have is the choleric temperament, okay? And the choleric temperament for me is represented by the rabbit, okay? They are the doers. They that's what they do. They are short-tempered, fast, and irritable, just like rabbit, right? Of Winnie the Pooh. So let's read about the choleric, all right? The temperament of a person is a pattern of, okay, it is important to remember that it is different from a character. I'm sorry. Let's go over there. Persons of the choleric temperament are easily and strongly aroused, and the impression lasts for a long time, okay? All right, so here it's almost like, it's funny because the choleric is like a combination of the melancholic and sanguine, right? They're he has the very sanguine, temperament that is easily and strongly aroused, okay, like a sanguine. But unlike the sanguine that, they're easily forgetful and it doesn't last that long, in the choleric, it lasts a long time. They are, the Energizer Bunny. Boom, 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 boom. That's what they are. Theirs is the temperament which produces great saints or great sinners. You know why? Because they're doers, and they're very passionate doers, okay? Sanguines are passionate, but it doesn't last that long, okay? But cholerics are passionate, and it lasts a long time, and they get things done. While all the temperaments can be utilized as material for sanctity, it seems that the largest number of canonized saints possess a choleric temperament. Okay? Why? Because you get things done. That's what the cholerics do. They get things done. All right? They're the doers. And what makes a great saint? Getting things done. Well, you can't be a great saint if you don't get anything done, right? If you're not doing your prayers, if you're not helping other people, how can you be considered, a great saint? If you're just sitting there doing nothing, then you can't be considered a great saint. So they are the doers, and they get things done. Okay, they're great sinners because they get things done, right? They truly get things done, whether evil or good, right? Here are the good qualities of this temperament, all right? Great energy and activity. Oh, they are the great energy people. They have, they just, keep going and going and going. They can be constantly active, all right? They don't get burnt out like a sanguine does. The other is that they have sharp intellect. They're very smart. Just like the melancholics, they're very, very smart. So, unlike the melancholics, though, who are not strong in confidence and are pessimistic, these people are strong-willed. They are strong-willed, and they have a resolute will. So, it's not like the melancholic who have the intelligence, who are then timid and afraid to act upon them. No, these people have a sharp intellect and smart, and they're strong-willed so that they will get things done, right? So you got passion and energy, you have intelligence, and you have the will to get it done. Wow. Is there anything wrong, right? They have good powers of concentration, okay? That's one thing that is important. They have great powers of concentration. The sanguine don't. They don't have a great power of concentration because after, a short-lived, they're like tinder, okay? They really are. They burn out very quickly. But the good powers of concentration, they can concentrate and get things done. They have the depth like the melancholic. They have the depth, all right? And then constancy, magnanimity, and liberality, okay? This is what makes them different from a melancholic, okay, is that they have the constancy of a melancholic, but here's the difference. They have magnanimity. Magnanimity is the virtue in which they have this grandiose, like they think they're better and greater than anything else, and liberality, meaning they're just generous and they go out and they are full of optimism. That is ultimately the difference. They have this optimism and passion, okay? They are the closest to getting the good things of a sanguine and the good things of the melancholic and combining them together. So they have the great ideas of and passion of a sanguine and optimism of a sanguine, but they have the intelligence and depth and reflection and constancy of the melancholic, okay, without the discouragement and sadness and pessimism. So they are the doer, and that's what makes them such great doers, okay, like the Energizer Bunny. So the cholerics are practical rather than theoretical. All right. Doers are practical. They don't like theoretical, okay? Because theoretical doesn't get things done. It's all intellectual. It's all reflective. It's all thinking. They are more inclined to work than to think. They like to work. Inactivity is repugnant to them, and they are always looking forward to the next labor or to the formulation of some great project. Once they have set upon a plan of work, they immediately set their hand to the task. Hence, this temperament produces many leaders, superiors, apostles. It is the temperament of government and administration. So they have great, you can see leaders in them, you can see doers in them, they're superiors, they're apostles, they get things done, and they want other things done. They're work. They're great taskmasters because they can't stand people who don't work, right? So these persons do not leave for tomorrow what they can do today. But sometimes they may try to do today what they should leave for tomorrow. In other words, these are the workaholics. Okay, this is the workaholic temperament. They work and work and work and work and work. These people, you don't need, other than just saying thank you and kind of giving them, a pat on the shoulder. They don't need any coaxing to do work because they just work. Okay, they do. If difficulties or obstacles arise, they immediately set about to overcome them. Although they often have strong movements of irascibility and impatience in the face of problem, once they have conquered these movements, they acquire a tenderness and sweetness of disposition that are noteworthy. So what it's saying here is that they do get impatient. They do get upset when obstacles are there. But once they control themselves and understand the problem, they go with the task of a sweetness that are there. Okay. Unlike a sanguine, when they see an obstacle, they just become this melodramatic, this is it, the world is coming to an end kind of a way. While a choleric would just be angry and say, man, I can't believe that this obstacle's here, blah, blah. And they would vent for a little bit, and then they would try to solve the problem and then move forward with it. Okay? So that's what they do. Now, the saints who possess the choleric temperament are numerous, but here's a few of them. St. Paul. If you read St. Paul's amazing. He is definitely a choleric, and you can read it in the scriptures. You can read it in his pastoral letters, that he is definitely a choleric. You can see the passion inside of him. He's a doer. He wants to get things done. He wants to crush this Jewish heresy called Christianity, right? And he goes out and he methodically goes from synagogue to synagogue to kill these Christians, okay? But once he gets converted, he does the same thing. He wants to now think of ways of how to evangelize this new religion, okay, called the Catholic Church. And so he does that, okay? He writes about in the letter to the Hebrews, letter to the Romans, on why he's going to evangelize to the Gentiles. One of the reasons is to convert his own people. So he's scheming. He's doing these things. He's going to other countries to evangelize, okay? But you can see in his letters that when there's an obstacle in front of him, he gets frustrated, He gets frustrated. Listen to read the letters of how frustrated he gets with the people who he just evangelized to, and then all of a sudden they're behaving badly. He calls them children. My children, don't go back to your former ways. So St. Jerome, you can see how he's the one that we attribute the Bible to, the Latin Vulgate, right? And yet he was constantly at odds with St. Augustine, all right? St. Ignatius of Loyola, he was a soldier. And of course, St. Francis de Sales. So they're doers with outbursts of some temperaments. And a good analogy of that is rabbit. Rabbit is a doer. He's always farming in there, and all of a sudden he will get all angry if someone should mess up his rows of carrots or mess up his rows of tomatoes or whatever vegetables he has out there. So that's what cholerics do, right? All right, here's some bad tendencies of the choleric, right? They seem like indestructible great saints, but there are always bad tendencies. The tenacity of the choleric temperament sometimes produces the following evil effects, and these are evil: hardness, obstinacy, insensibility, anger, and pride. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Yes. So in other words, if the choleric is not on the path of holiness, they're in the path of destruction. And it's very hard to move them. That's basically what it is. They're either, because they're just nothing but pure work, they're either going to be pure evil work or pure holy work. So it is important because their hardness, they can be hardened of heart, all right? Their obstinacy, okay? They're obdurate, all right? Insensibility, They are. They have insensibility because they're just worried about work and not about thinking about it. Okay? And they have anger and pride. Pride, and that makes them immovable, and anger. So it's hard. It's not something that you can debate and convince a choleric. All right? They have to go through a radical change. Look at St. Paul. St. Paul had to go through a radical change. He was blinded by God. Okay? He was obstinate. I must crush the Christian heresy. And that's what it was. For him, Christianity is a heresy of Judaism. And he needed to crush it from synagogue to synagogue. And he did it methodically, and he did it with the approval of the Sanhedrin. So, and he was constantly, going after that. So it took some radical change for him, all right, to occur. If choleric persons are resisted, they may easily become violent, cruel, arrogant. Okay, listen to that. Cholerics become very, very violent, cruel, and arrogant. Okay, because understand this. Like the sanguine are very passionate people, but they easily forget, which forgives very easily. Okay? That's what happens. They forgive very, very easily. And they don't do vendettas. They don't contemplate, in essence. Okay? While cholerics do. That's why they become very violent in nature of what's going on and arrogant. Unless the Christian virtues moderate these inclinations, okay, this is why Christian virtue is so important. If defeated by others, they may nurture hatred in their hearts until they have obtained their vengeance. They easily become ambitious and seek their own glory. Magnanimity, we said it was one of the strengths. Well, magnanimity is, if taken too far, is vainglory. It goes after glory. So they have vendettas. Because remember, their memory is very long-lasting. Okay? So they'll have vengeance if they lose. Okay? So they're very competitive. All right? They become ambitious and seek their own glory. Very ambitious. Okay? They have greater patience than do the sanguine. That's one of the main reasons why they're better than sanguine. But they may lack delicacy of feelings and are often insensitive to the feelings of others. And that is absolutely right. They have sanguine personality have a great empathy. All right, empathy is very, very important. But cholerics have zero empathy. Now they might sympathize, but they do not have empathy. All right, that's something they need to practice. So because of that, and that's why they can be so cruel, because they don't feel the sadness. Okay, it's very hard for sanguine people to be cruel. Now, it's not to say that we can't get angry, okay, but it doesn't last long because, first of all, it doesn't last. Our memory doesn't last long. Well, because also is empathy. We can see and reflect how that really and feel the sadness that we did that count. But cholerics can't see that. They have very low empathy. Their passions, when aroused, are so strong and impetuous that they smother the more tender emotions and the spirit of sacrifice, which springs spontaneously from more sympathetic hearts. In other words, as I said, they're kind of like sanguine because they're passionate people, but because it's so strong and because it's long-lasting, see, that's the key here. Because it's long-lasting, it smothers, okay, the lesser of the temperaments. So if you had, let's say, for example, the melancholic, all right, with a choleric, you're going to see a dominance, okay, in that relationship. All right, the choleric is going to just dominate, okay, that melancholic, Because a melancholic who can't even express, okay, their feelings, all right, let alone, being able to explain things. Now you have this choleric that is not even allowing them and just dominating them, okay? So it's a very, very domineering, okay, in there. Now, or even if you have a choleric that's with a sanguine and they're both are passionate, okay? Sooner or later, the sanguine is going to bow down, okay? Their fever for activity and their eagerness to execute the resolution cause them to disregard others, to thrust all impediments aside, and to give the appearance of being heartless egoists. Oh, man. Heartless egoists, okay? When people are in this choleric state, and they're just work, all right? There's a statistic that says, I remember reading this one time. They say that, like, if you can get 60% productivity out of your employees, okay, you're actually doing pretty good. And that is above average type of productivity. Now think about that. 60% productivity. That means when I hire an employee and, and I hire them for 8 hours, I'm only going to get about 5 hours worth of productivity out of them, okay? Between all the other stuff that they do and everything else. See, cholerics, though, are 100%. Not only 100%, they are a 200%. Because not only are they going to do the 8 hours and be productive, but they're going to do another 8 hours, 16 hours, to produce 200%. And it's going to be pure work. But because they have low empathy and because they're just high work, they feel like they're just heartless egoists. And they look at you and say, why can't you keep up with me? Why can't you do the work that I do? Okay? And that's not, they're not doing that intentionally, but that's what naturally happens. So what happens here is that, it's, especially for the sanguine, when they see people who are like that, they're like, that's like a marathon runner telling a fat slob, that, hey, why aren't you keeping up with me? Okay? And meanwhile, they run that, quarter of a mile, and they can't keep up, and the marathon runner is saying, why can't you keep up? Keep up with me. And so it's very, very hard. So in their treatment of others, they sometimes display a coldness and indifference which reaches the point of cruelty. The only rights which they acknowledges are the satisfaction and attainment of their desires. It is evident from the foregoing that if the choleric person pursues the path of evil, there is no length to which he will not go in order to achieve his goal. Okay? So really I can sum this up in that paragraph is really to say the choleric is actually is actually two things. One is he or she does not have empathy. Okay? Zero empathy towards another person. And because of that, there's this indifference and coldness that occurs. Okay, this because of this lack of empathy. And because they are working and work very hard, they don't see the people who are the average person who can't keep up with them as worth anything. And so it's, again, that analogy of that marathon runner saying, why can't you keep up with me? Why can't you keep up with me? And you need to run. And meanwhile, the guy's like, I can't run any further. And because they have zero empathy towards that person who can't run, it feels for that person who's trying to run with him, keep up, feels like this person's cruel. This person is crazy. Okay? So they need to be able to get a higher level of empathy that goes along with it. So, and as you can see, it's very, very easy for them to become great saints if their focus on their doing is good and holy as opposed to evil. All right? So they can be purely evil or purely a great saint. All right. And it's very easy for them to go in one direction or the other. Okay. As a spiritual director, what would they be training on? Or maybe in yourself, what would a choleric be doing? A choleric person can be individuals of great worth if they succeed in controlling and guiding their energies. See? It's where they're going, right? If they're doing good and holy things, or are they doing evil things? They could arrive at the height of perfection with relative facility. In other words, they can be great saints, okay, with very much ease. In their hands, even the most difficult tasks seem to be brought to an easy and ready solution. Therefore, when they have themselves under control and are rightly directed, they will not cease in their efforts until they have reached the summit. So these people can reach the great heights, okay? But there's several obstacles that they have, okay? They need to have a lot of self-mastery, okay? They need, so one of the things that they need to do is employ more sympathy and empathy in the situation. They need to be directed and guided towards holiness and perfection, and need great self-mastery. They need to stop thinking always about work and the pure thing, but also be self-reflective. They must be taught to keep themselves under the reins of self-mastery, not to act with precipitation, but to mistrust their first inclinations. This is really important. They must mistrust their first inclinations. Their first inclination is always to work, okay, to get things done. That's what it is. They must mistrust that. They need to reflect more, okay, and not so much focus on act as it is reflection. They can learn a lot from a melancholic to learn to reflect. Okay? That's really what it is. They can learn a lot from a sanguine, because a sanguine person has a wholeheartedness of all of the passions, joy, happiness, laughter, while the passion of work and being passionate about getting things done is what they are involved with. And all the others are not, important to them. Above all, they need to cultivate true humility of heart, to be compassionate to the weak and the uninstructed, not to humiliate or embarrass others, not to exert their own superiority, and to treat all persons with tenderness and understanding. In a word, they should be taught how to be detached from self and to manifest a generous love towards others. And the only way that they can do that is by becoming more empathetic, okay? Having empathy. That's really the key, okay? Sanguine people typically have a very empathetic heart. So in the beginning, the choleric can learn to be sympathetic, all right? So that's more of a logical understanding that in this situation, a person would be sad, and reading things from a more of an objective standpoint. But as they grow in spirituality and Christian perfection, they will learn to become more empathetic. Because empathy is really where you want to get at, to get the feelings of what their feelings are. And that's how you grow also in sanctity. Empathy is what allows us to unite ourselves with Christ. Okay? It's great to say I can meditate on the cross and be sympathetic that Jesus died on the cross for us. Okay? But to unite ourselves with Christ on the cross is to now empathize what he's feeling on that cross, to be one with him, because we feel what he feels, okay? We are one with it. And that's what empathy does. We are drawn into the person's feelings and emotions. Sanguine people are good at doing that, to the point where sometimes it's a bad thing, but but it's also good as well. So the choleric can learn that from a sanguine person, okay? Because once we understand that, we can become in touch with and have a better union with God and a better union with other people as well. So it's very easy. So humility, okay, is very important. Look at faults of themselves rather than the faults of others. Okay? And a great generosity. So that's the choleric. All right? Great saints and great sinners come from there, and you can see that. All right? I will say that I love working with cholerics as an employee. Who doesn't? They're doers. When you get a few of those in your, and then you only get a few, and they are very cooperative. They are amazing people to work with. Amazing, just amazing. Cholerics who aren't humble, okay, are not great to work with because they will destroy you. Cholerics who are very, very humble, they are awesome to work for. They are awesome. Cholerics, in my opinion, you can leave them alone. As long as you give them a direction of what they do, they'll get it done for you. Don't micromanage cholerics. I can tell you that. All right. The phlegmatic temperament. All right. That's the fourth temperament. The phlegmatic temperament is, okay. So I apologize. We'll have to stop right now because it is right now time for us to close. So we will continue our talk with the phlegmatic temperament next session. And we will ensure that we finish up the 4 temperaments. So let's end it with a prayer in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Lord Jesus, help us to understand who we are. Help us to understand that all temperaments, one is not better than the other, but to obtain the great qualities of each one of these temperaments, and that we become a great holy saint through Christian perfection. As we pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Here's a reflection for you. Take a moment and think about what is our predominant temperament. And what do you think are the virtues and vices that I need to work on? Feel free to share your reflection or leave a comment on the podcast, Instagram, Facebook at Practical Catholic, or visit my webpage at practicalcatholic1, that is the number 1.com. Join me next week as we continue to discuss knowing ourselves and the 4 temperaments.
You're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.